Hi friends, I hope you're all well. Today I'm going to be sharing with you my May wrap-up. I'm joined today by my lovely, I think it's a Monstera plant that I have just propagated. I'll play some video of me kind of repotting the plant. I shared it on my Instagram earlier. But I essentially repotted a plant that I'd had for 2 years sitting in the same small pot, which was actually in this pot, and gave it a new home. And with that I tried to propagate a small part of the plant to create a new one. So let's see how that goes. It's currently looking kind of cute, and my partner compared it to Groot, so that was really cute. But into the books I read this month. The first book I read this month was Elle's, and that was by Toussaint and Aveline Stockart. And this is a graphic novel following a young girl who has dissociative identity disorder, or DID. And it basically follows this young girl, and the illustrated format works really well because we're able to see the way that her and her alters interact together and the way that she switches and things like that. I think it was really well done. And they use colour really well to kind of illustrate the different alters coming to the fore. And I thought that was really well done, and I think it was one of these ones that will hopefully help to break down the stigma of DID. I was interested in it because I have previously, I've actually been watching quite a lot of YouTube videos about DID, and I've also been reading some stuff about it, one of which was All of Me by Kim Noble, which is a book that's definitely worth reading. It's like a memoir which follows Kim Noble and her story and her experiences of having a DID. And then recently it's kind of come more into my kind of field division again, so I read that a few years back. And then it's come into my field of vision again a bit more, having watched some more YouTube videos. So when I saw this title on NetGalley Read Now, I was really keen to try it and see what I thought of it, having had a wee bit more understanding of DID. And so I'm really hoping it's one of these titles that does break down some stigma around DID, because I know that does exist. And I'm also hoping that young people who have DID might see themselves in this graphic novel. I thought it was really good. It was really enjoyable. I really enjoyed getting to know Elle and her gang of friends and all of her alters. I thought it was really well done, very beautiful artwork. I really enjoyed it, and I ended up giving it 5 stars. I then read another graphic novel, and this was Forget Me Not by Alix Garin, and this was quite a difficult read. It follows a young woman called Clemence and her mother and grandmother, but mostly her and her grandmother. And her grandmother has Alzheimer's, and basically Clemence goes to visit her grandmother in the care home that she's been living, and she gets this feeling like her grandmother's not really well cared for, she's not very happy, and her grandmother keeps trying to escape the care home. And so Clemence goes back and she decides to actually break her grandmother free and take her with her, and they go on this road trip sort of adventure, and it's all about the people they meet as they go on this road trip. And then we get flashes forward to the future of after the road trip, and we get flashes back to experiences they've had together. And it was very emotional. There's a lot of very emotive scenes in this. I really like the way Alix Garin kind of uses space and kind of built in these big pages of illustrations where there's one in particular where they're in a bathtub together, the grandmother and granddaughter, and they're discussing sort of life experiences, and we flash back to experience of domestic abuse that the granddaughter experienced, and she's sitting in this bathtub with her grandmother and thinking, what did she go through, what did she experience in her life? And I thought it was just quite beautiful, this kind of connectiveness of kind of seeing your grandmother as a woman fundamentally, and not just kind of grandma. And I think it's definitely a pivotal moment for our character to kind of have that shift in perspective about the grandmother. I just thought it was very well done, and I really connected with our main character because she kind of experiences this real joy at learning so much about her grandmother through the kind of flashbacks and the time periods where her grandmother is kind of living in the past, or believes that they're still in the past. But then there's also this great sadness about the loss of who you know in the present day and the loss of the present moment with that person. And I really connected with that a lot. There were some quite disturbing scenes in this, and some scenes that did sit unpleasantly with me. So a lot of times Clemence kind of tries to bring her grandmother back to the present, telling her no, you're remembering that wrong, or this is where we are now, this is the reality, rather than just sitting with her in the place that she is. And I found that really difficult to read, because I know that that's not really what you should do with somebody with Alzheimer's or dementia. You should really kind of sit with them and just be wherever they are, because what they're experiencing is what is real to them, and you end up causing more distress by pulling them out of that place. So that was really hard to read. And there's also a really disturbing scene where Clemence is violent to her grandmother, and that was so difficult to read. And I also just felt like that didn't really fit with the narrative of like this loving granddaughter who would break the grandmother out of a care home. I just didn't understand why that had happened in that way. And while I think what the author was trying to get across was the kind of frustration that might come through caring for someone with dementia and the high care needs that person will have, I did just feel like it didn't fit. And so this ended up getting 4 stars rather than 5. But I still really had a very emotional experience reading it. So it's one that definitely will stick with me. I then started the reading vlog, which you might have seen, which was where I read 3 books that were romance books by Asian authors for Asian Readathon. And I had a really good time filming that vlog. The first book that I read for it was Her Big City Neighbour by Jackie Lau. And this was a fun, light-hearted sort of kind of enemies to lovers, but they weren't really established enemies. They're next door neighbours and they kind of hit it off. It had a lot of on-page sex, very sexy scenes, and I really enjoyed watching their relationship grow. And I also really liked that we saw Toronto and we got to kind of experience that with our main protagonist, who was just moving to the city. So that was really fun, and we went on to a lot of restaurants and experienced a lot of different food from all around the world, and I just loved those scenes. So it was a good fun read. The end kind of 20% kind of fell off a cliff for me personally, but I did go on and read more from Jackie Lau, so I'll get to that in a wee minute. And the second book I read for that vlog was P.S. I Still Love You by Jenny Han, and this is the follow-on to All the Boys I've Loved Before, in which our main protagonist's sister sends out love letters that she wrote as a young woman to all these guys, and then it kind of the repercussions of that fall through. And I don't want to say too much about the second book for fear of giving something away about the first book, but it was a good sequel. I enjoyed it. I had a better time watching the films before reading the books, which is what I did with the first book, and this time around I read the book and then watched the film, and I wish I'd done it the other way around. So I think for the third book I'll watch the film and then read the book, and I think that'll be a better reading experience for me. But they are like really cute, cozy, lovely romances, and as I said in the vlog, I would definitely recommend reading them around about the Christmas time, because the first book has Christmassy scenes and the second book has like New Year's scenes, so definitely one to read around about that time. I then went on to read The Reason I Jump, and this is one that I had in my Books by Autistic Writers video, and I had said that I would like to read this soon, and I owned it and everything like that. So doing that video really made me want to pick up a lot of those books, so I have gradually done that over the weeks since. But honestly, I will say this one was not what I was expecting. I thought we were going to get the main author's point of view and kind of experiences and just like more of a memoir format, but what this actually is David Mitchell, the author, asking this young man a series of questions, and then we get his answers. And some of the questions really were like, why have you asked that? Like, oh my goodness, it was so uncomfortable to think about how that young man must be experiencing that question. And I just felt so uncomfortable listening to David Mitchell ask these like really ableist, there's no really other way I can say it, really ableist questions. And then hearing this young man reply, and I just thought that must have been so uncomfortable. And I've looked in my journal just now to kind of see how I wrote about this book, and what I have said is that David Mitchell effectively asked the author, why are you the way that you are?
Why are you the way that you are?
Over and over and over again for the entire book, and it was just so uncomfortable to read, and I just felt overwhelming sadness for this young man and just totally lost respect for David Mitchell, to be honest. I just thought it was just really badly done, and not helpful. Like, who is that helping? It just didn't feel like it was really a productive or healthy conversation to be having. But saying that, I did really appreciate what the author shared, especially when like they shared one of their short stories, and some of the kind of things that they chose to share themselves. I really appreciated it and really liked listening to them because I listened to the audiobook. But I just wish the book had been more from his perspective and less of David Mitchell involved. I didn't realise he would be so heavily involved. So definitely something to keep in mind if you do want to pick that book up. Maybe not one I would recommend personally, but I feel bad not recommending it because the author did have some interesting things to say, and I really liked their short story that they included. So if you've read this one, I'd be very curious to hear what you think of it. Because yeah, as I said, I had quite I almost DNF'd it because I thought this is really not sitting well with me at all. So yeah, it'd be interesting to hear what you think. I then read the very short but very beautiful Everything is Beautiful and I'm Not Afraid, and this follows a fictional character, but it felt very memoir-esque, and it's a young queer Chinese-born immigrant in the US, and we follow their kind of experiences of like culture shock and moving from a place where they were not able to be queer and out, and their family didn't really accept them, to then being in the US where it's more kind of normalised or more like acceptable, I guess, more accepted, and to kind of experience that acceptance and kind of wrestle with like culture shock, wrestle with feeling of like, do I accept myself? Is this internal rejection? Trying to make friends, lots of things that a lot of immigrants experience, but then there was also this element of queerness and, you know, not being accepted in your home country, but then suddenly people accepting you for who you are. There were also a lot of mental health references and representation, I guess you could say, in this book, and I thought a lot of that was very moving, very relatable, just definitely a strong connection that I felt with this book. It was very, very beautiful. It was interesting as well because it is like sort of single page or like small like 1 or 2 pages of like a story almost, and then it forms a full narrative through the book, and it does kind of all link together, but it might feel a little bit disjointed to some readers. I'm not sure. I didn't really find it too disjointed. I kind of was able to just go with what the author was doing, but I could see that some people might find it that way. But these short comics kind of show like a more like emotional experiences or personal experiences. Sometimes they were just like thought dumps, like here's something I've been thinking about recently, and there were a lot of ideas explored, and then also these like tender moments. I just thought it was very well done, very, very nice, and I've never heard anyone talk about it. I just picked it up on a whim in the library, and I'm glad I did, because through all these small comics a kind of very beautiful full narrative is formed, and it's just very nice. I really enjoyed reading this one. I especially loved the explorations of identity, belonging, also like presentation of gender, and the author plays with that through this fictional character. I have to keep reminding myself that this is not a real person, this is a fictional character, but it just felt so real and true. And there's also a lot of like reflections and thoughts about home, like where is home, what does home mean, which is all things that, to be honest, I think about a lot, and so I felt very connected through those discussions as well. But yeah, I really, really enjoyed this one. It's got very nice sort of artwork as well, quite sort of playful, fun, bright artwork. Really enjoyed it. Would recommend. I think I gave it 4 stars. I then finished reading IraqiGirl, which I was reading for my underrated books vlog that I did, reading the most underrated books on my TBR vlog, and that was like really hard hitting. There was this kind of contrast between being a young teenager and experiencing like everyday teenage things, and then these like horrific events that were happening all around during the US occupation of Iraq. And I think our protagonist is roughly like 13, I think, but they grow up through the book, and very moving to kind of watch this young woman turn into this like slightly older young woman, I guess, still young by the time the book finishes, but just it's sort of so, I just felt overwhelming sadness at the kind of loss of innocence and youth. And I know we put a high kind of value on that as humans maybe, but also just maybe in just the society I grew up in, we put a high value on youth, but it just felt like such a loss, and I just felt enormous grief for the kind of innocence of childhood that this author wasn't able to have. So yeah, it was very hard hitting. I did find some of the editorial work kind of didn't really work for me. I felt like it was maybe a little bit kind of over explaining some things, but this book is aimed at a young audience. It's aimed at like 12 to 14-year-olds, I think, a sort of young teenage audience, and so it could have just been speaking to that audience. And I think in particular the editors were speaking to a young non-Muslim American audience. So it's definitely one I'd recommend for young readers, especially if you have a young reader in your life who's interested in global politics. There are like points at which there's a Q&A between some young American and Russian, I think, people, and our author, the IraqiGirl blogger, whose name is like a pseudonym. And I do think it might have been pretty good in like a classroom or like reading group setting, because it would have given kids a kind of space to learn about what happened and kind of reflect on it and talk about it. But yeah, definitely one I'd recommend for young readers, but there are like quite a lot of content warnings, so definitely proceed with caution still. And I then read Hana Carries On, which I really enjoyed. We follow our main character Hana, who records podcasts and is really involved in radio shows and loves expressing herself in that way. And her family have a restaurant which begins to struggle when a new restaurant is opened on the same street, I think, or just across the road or somewhere close by, which starts to try and steal some of their customers. And they're there to compete. They're not kind of like just there as another option. They're there to compete. They are serious business owners. And in that way, it's like a You've Got Mail retelling, because there's this competitiveness and a lot of tension between the restaurants, and very interesting kind of dynamics that go on there. I loved Hannah's family. She has some visitors that come over from India, and I loved getting to know all of those characters, seeing their backstories, etc. It was just a really good time reading this book. It also covers some more heavy subjects like the rise in Islamophobia, the boxes we're put into as individuals, also the people who have power, what kinds of stories they allow to be told, especially from Muslim voices. So there's a lot of kind of interesting commentary that went on there. But then at its heart, this book is a sort of sweet, slow burn romance, which was very lovely to read. So it was kind of a mix between this sweet, wholesome, lovey-dovey side and then these more heavier hitting topics. But it was overall a very interesting, engaging read. I've read Aisha at Last by the same author, really enjoyed that too, so I will read whatever they produce next. I gave this one 4 stars, and would recommend. And the next book I read was also set in Canada. I don't know if I said that last one was set in Canada, but this next one was as well. And it was Not Another Family Wedding by Jackie Lau, and I did really enjoy this one. It's a kind of friends to lovers romance, which is a kind of trope I think I like. And while it was a little convenient in places and some of the plot points were a little bit kind of like, would that happen? I did really like it. I had a good time reading it. And there was some interesting commentary about the choice not to have a child, and also about Canada's anti-Asian policies, and history of anti-Asian policies, which I thought was really interesting. I was really not expecting that from this romance, so it was very interesting in that way. So there was a bit more kind of meat, I guess, to the story, a bit more elements than the previous Jackie Lau book that I read, but a bit more convenient than that last one as well. And this one as well had less of the food scenes, which I enjoyed in the first Jackie Lau I read. So it was a kind of mixed bag. And the final book I read this month was I'm Waiting for You by Kim Bo-young, and this was translated by Sophie Bowman and Sung Roo. And this was a very interesting book because I didn't really fully understand what I was going into, and it's laid out as 4 separate short stories, but those short stories form 2 novellas, one of which sits in the middle of the book and the other one was like the bookmarks at the start and the end of it. So it was kind of interesting format, and I don't think I fully realised that, but it made a lot of sense when I reached the end of the book and read the author note, etc. The structure made more sense to me, but it was an interesting kind of structure. I absolutely adored the titular story, so I'm Waiting for You, and the second corresponding story that goes with it. It basically follows a couple and the wife goes on a space mission and she's due back at a set time, a set date, and the husband doesn't want to wait. I mean, they're only engaged, they're not quite married yet, but he doesn't want to wait for her, and so he saves up his money and he decides to go on a space mission to waste time. So he goes to space, he spends only a couple of months, and he's meant to due back on Earth to meet her at the wedding day. but things don't really go as planned, and I don't want to say too much more than that, but there was a lot of interesting commentary in this about climate change, the Earth's environment, also just like a very kind of lovely love story that I was totally engrossed in, I was like, oh, when are they going to have this wedding? When am I going to see the wedding? So I was really engrossed in that. I loved the space setting, all the kind of experiences that they had in space. I just really enjoyed reading about that. And there's also this kind of interesting commentary that happens about belonging, about our place in the world, about the structures of othering other people. If you don't know what othering is, it's where you basically decide that, oh, that person belongs to this group and therefore they're not like me and these are my people and you're other. I don't know if I'm really simplifying that, but that's kind of, it talks about that process of othering as well, which I thought was really interesting. And I just overall loved that story. I was between a 4 and 5 stars for it. I just really enjoyed it. And then the second story, it was like this, it went totally over my head. I did not understand it, and I felt pretty bad about that because it covers a lot of themes that seem or are really interesting to me, like reincarnation, like the idea of twin souls, or like that our souls have a life beyond our physical body. Really interesting things to me, but I just felt like I did not understand what was going on, and I tried and I just thought, I'm really not getting this, so I DNF'd it. So I had a 4 or 5 star story and a DNF. So it was a strange title, strange reading experience. But I adored the afterword, the letters from the author, letters from the translator, and the communications between them, and learning more about that through reading those sort of sections at the end of the book. Really interesting, and really brought the book to life for me. I just really enjoyed reading that. So if you do read this one, make sure you read right to the end so you can kind of hear what they have to say and like see them kind of communicate with each other and learn more about the background of the stories, because that totally brought it to life for me. I really enjoyed doing that. So yeah, I had a really pretty good reading month. It was quite kind of varied in what I was reading. A lot of the titles that I read were for Asian Readathon, and I've managed to tick off all the prompts for that, so that was a success. And I just had a really pretty good reading month. It was a pretty quick month, but I read a lot of good things. So I hope you might pick some of these up if they're interesting to you or sound interesting. Let me know if you'd be interested in picking any of these up, which ones would appeal to you, etc. Or if any of these were on your radar already, or you've read any and you have kind of different thoughts or same thoughts as me. I'd love to just chat to you in the comments below. But that's everything for this video. I hope you enjoyed watching, and I will see you again in my next one.